in order to compete effectively, you want to produce the products that consumers will ultimately buy. And there are different ways to compete. You can compete based on price, for example. You can provide the acceptable quality of product at the lower price, and you will attract consumers who are price sensitive. But then the other way to compete is you can offer better attributes, quality attributes or perceived attributes, and you can charge accordingly for it, but that way you can attract more attribute sensitive or quality sensitive customers. When we look at pet food industry in general, one of the trends that we see is that over time, it seems to be more of an attribute or perceived attribute quality-based competition rather than price competition.
Hello and welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. I am Jan Sukodolski and I'm dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the pet food science industry. So get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episodes. And today I'm very honored to have Dr. Aleksan Shanoyan, who is professor and University Distinguished Teaching Scholar at the Department of Agricultural Economics of Kansas State University. Aleksan, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a great honor. We're going to talk a lot about your research program today about economics, and especially you're looking at a lot of agribusiness economics and management and ultimately about pet consumer preferences, right? I think it's a very important area for pet foods. So Aleksan, I always like my guests to introduce themselves a little bit, to tell us a little bit about themselves, where they started, what was their career path and how they ended up and why they're exciting about the research they're doing. So,
thank you for this opportunity. It's very exciting to talk to you and to your audience. So currently I'm a professor in agricultural economics in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Kansas State University. My area of research is on agribusiness economics and management. So that encompasses a lot of different things. So I look at the agri-food supply chains, some management strategy problems there, marketing as well. And then we have a pretty wide portfolio of research projects, really encompassing anything from, again, looking at risk management, supply chain, agribusiness, marketing, but also looking at supply chains in developing countries as well. So we have done some food security work in different parts of the world. We looked at agri-food supply chains in different parts of the world as well. We have some projects looking at technology application in agriculture. And then recently, maybe last 8 years, pet food really took a big portion of our research time and effort. So to give you an idea, over the last 8 years, we had 2 PhDs working on pet food issues and a couple of master students. So we have several ongoing projects looking at pet food economics and marketing.
That's great. We're going to come back to those, the focus on pet food, obviously. But I'm curious, what is your background, from education, and how did you your career path, what did it encompass that you ended now in economics, in agriculture, and ultimately now pet food, right?
So I'm from Armenia originally. It's a small country between Europe and Asia, so about the size of Maryland with about 3 million population. So that's where I grew up, on a small farm in a small town. And then when I came to US, that's when I realized how small our farm was. I saw some of the huge farms in US. And then my undergrad, I started in accounting, and my thinking was everybody needs an accountant. So if I can become a good accountant, I can make a good living for myself. And then after a year in accounting program, I moved to Russia because the times were pretty tough in Armenia. The economic situation was very dire. So I moved to Russia, which was a bigger country, looking for some more opportunities. And I started working in agribusiness, in agri-food supply chains. And that's when I realized that even though everybody needs an accountant, people need to eat before they need an accountant. So I came back and continued my education focusing on agribusiness. And this is about the time when Texas A&M started a agribusiness program in a collaboration with USDA and Armenian Agricultural Academy. It was a very, very nice opportunity for me. So I joined the program, and I got a degree in economics and a certificate from Texas A&M in agribusiness. So then that kind of led me, I realized that I would like to learn more. I kind of enjoy learning, especially agribusiness. So I applied to graduate programs in the US. And of course, US agribusiness was one of the some of the top universities in this field were in the US. And I was fortunate to get admitted to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And then I did my master's there. And then I moved to Michigan State for my PhD. And then in 2011, when I was about to finish my PhD, I got a chance to interview for a job here at K-State, and I was fortunate enough to get an offer. And since then, so for the last 13 years, I've been at K-State doing research, as I said, in agribusiness economics and applied economics, and then more recently in pet food economics and management and marketing.
It's amazing.
At Trow Nutrition, we blend our passion for customer success with our love for pet nutrition, bringing together the art and science of nutrition, ingredients, and blending. We're here to dream with you and help you create standout products. We're here to deliver for you with dry ingredient, pre-mixes, base blends, and specialty blends. And we're 100% dedicated to you with a complete focus on pet nutrition. See what Trow can do for you at trownutritionpets.com.
Can you give us a few examples, maybe like 1 or 2 kind of minutes about your general agroeconomics, what your goals was, and then how it ultimately transitioned into the pet foods space?
Yes. So essentially, what we're looking at when you think about agri-food supply chain, so it starts with input suppliers, then you have farmers who produce crops, then goes into processing, and then some more processing, distribution, retail, ultimately reaches final consumer. And there are all kinds of issues along the supply chain. So there are some production problems and decisions that farmers have to make. There are some relationships, the contracting and governance structure along the supply chain with processors, etc. And then the retail, the consumer behavior, consumer preferences. So there are decision makers at each of the stages of the supply chain need some research-based insights to help make their decisions, and that's where our research comes in.
And then ultimately, so in the past, before you focus on the pet food space, was it more large animal? What kind of supply chain was it? Or was it always already in the area of pet foods?
No, we had projects looking at, for example, beef supply chain. We had projects looking at fruits and vegetables, dairy, grains, ethanol, both in US, but also in developing countries. So, but some of the skills and experiences and expertise is transferable to pet food supply chain, because pet food, we have consumers. The supply chain is similar. It's an agri-food supply chain. So
before we come to the consumer preferences, such as one interesting question for myself is, so what are the challenges? What are the big changes you see over the last 1 or 2 decades in this whole supply chain, especially for pet foods?
Especially for pet food?
Mm-hmm. Or in general, it can also be general.
Yeah, well, in general, I would say there is the consolidation. So you can see consolidation at different stages of supply chain. So there are fewer farms, but bigger farms. There are fewer processors, but bigger processors, fewer retailers, bigger retailers. So that's one kind of big general trend. And of course, consumer preferences are shifting with the With the introduction and advancements in information communication technologies, information, good or bad, tends to spread really fast, and that affects consumer preferences pretty dramatically. So those are probably some of the big ones. And then, of course, some policy and regulations and trade, and we have been seeing a lot of that. And then more recently, new technologies, AI, and entering into field. So it's never a boring or dull day,
So what is your now? So you said you had several PhD and master students. So what was their focus when they focused on pet foods?
So the first one was both of them are looking at consumer preferences, the PhD students, and the first one was looking at post-purchase experiences of pet food buyers, because that's what affects the repeat purchases. But also, as I said, in this day and age, post-purchase experiences can result in reviews and online, and then that also affects consumer purchasing. So that in one of the projects, that one student looked into thousands of online reviews of pet food buyers of different products, and then try to discern what are the things that they're happy about, what are the things that are unhappy about, and then how does that compare with how the pet food company is trying to position their product, and then how does that also compare to the competitors' products and competitors' consumers. Another project was looking at pet food demand, so trying to understand how consumers respond to price changes. So this is just trying to estimate the demand elasticities and understand how price changes will affect the quantity purchased. Another project was looking at the needs of pet food industry decision makers. So this was based on a survey of pet food manufacturers, ingredient suppliers, and really the idea was to try to understand what are some of the pressing issues in pet food industry. So really to make sure that the research that we're doing is actually meeting the needs of the industry stakeholders.
So what are the big takeaways from those projects?
Let me start with the first one. We were looking at two particular products. I'm not going to name the exact products, but there were some discrepancies between what a company is trying to position their product as, so looking at specific attributes, and then how consumers perceive this, or what's their post-purchase experience. So they were happy about some of the things that companies tried to kind of promote, and then they were unhappy about some other things, and then we're comparing it with competitors. So there were some lessons to be learned for both the product design, but also for marketing as well, ultimately to improve competitive position of pet food manufacturing.
Is it possible to give us one or two examples without being...
Well, I'll probably give an example. So sometimes the negative reviews that we see for the product might not be related to actual product, but it might be related to a service. So, like, for example, when we go and look at reviews when we're trying to decide on a product, we usually just look at, is it 4-star or 3-star in general, right? There might be one star that brings the average down, and that 1 star might be because the product arrived ripped. So there were some of these type of examples, but then there are also some things that just, for example, consumers weren't happy with the way the pet is feeling after they consumed it, right? So there were some complaints about, the stool and things like that, even though the product was trying to position as healthy for digestive system. For the demand analysis, probably one of the things that we're trying to get more insight on is there is this concept of pre-committed demand. So what it is that there is a certain amount of the product or service we will buy despite the price. And then beyond that amount, we will be responding more strongly to price. So for example, if the gas prices go up, you're still going to buy that minimum amount of gas to get you to work and home, right? But you might put aside your long road trip, right? So that portion that you're going to buy, no matter what, that's the pre-committed portion. So we have a hypothesis that there's the pre-commitment in pet food. So there is a certain amount of pet food that pet owners will buy, and then beyond that, then they'll be responding to price, right, more strongly. So if you don't account in your demand analysis and estimations for that pre-commitment, you might have more biased elasticities, and essentially the decisions that are based on these types of information might lead to unintended outcomes. And why do you need the information on demand elasticities? Because let's say if you're deciding on certain policies, let's say taxation, sales tax that might increase the price, or the trade policy that might increase the cost of the input or ingredient that will ultimately increase the price of the product. So when you're making those decisions, you want to know how this is going to affect the overall sales, right? How consumers will respond. So you need more accurate estimates of demand. And we hypothesize that there is some pre-commitment exists in pet food, and we're trying to estimate and see if it does exist, and then what's the extent of it for different types of pet food.
So when you look at consumer preferences, what are the attributes either in food itself, or treats is very popular now, that the US pet food buyers prefer nowadays, or at least the state they prefer?
That's a really good question, and let me maybe kind of step back and talk a little bit about why is it important to know what do buyers want. In US pet food market, there are lots of companies that are competing, different companies, large and small. And in order to compete effectively, you want to produce the products that consumers will ultimately buy. And there are different ways to compete. You can compete based on price, for example. You can provide the acceptable quality of product at the lower price, and you will attract consumers who are price sensitive. But then the other way to compete is you can offer better attributes, quality attributes or perceived attributes, and you can charge accordingly for it, but that way you can attract more attribute sensitive or quality sensitive customers. When we look at pet food industry in general, one of the trends that we see is that over time, it seems to be more of an attribute or perceived attribute quality-based competition rather than price competition. There is price competition in some sub-segments, but in general, it looks like, and this is driven by consumer trends like humanization, premiumization, we see that consumers are seeking more attributes. They're more attribute sensitive and quality feature sensitive rather than price sensitive. And there's some data that also supports that. If we look at the volume of pet food in 2020 and 2025, there really hasn't been much change in volume sold. But when you look at the value sold in terms of the dollar amount, it is about 70% increase.
70?
Yeah. So what that tells you is that, there's not a lot of price competition, because if there's price competition, we'd see prices going down, right? So it seems like there's more of a premiumization, and then companies are competing based on quality features, and they're charging accordingly. Obviously, there's some inflation that happened during the 5 years, but hopefully not 70%. So now, if you're a pet food manufacturer and you're trying to compete with other pet food manufacturers based on quality, features, and different attributes, realizing that your resources are not unlimited, you want to direct those resources to produce quality and features and attributes that are most demanded and wanted by customers. So then what are the ways you will know what is it that consumers want? So there's one way of finding out what consumers want is going and actually asking them, doing surveys, focus groups. And we can learn a lot from surveys and focus groups, but then sometimes even ourselves, we tend to say we would like to buy something, but actually we buy something else. Some of it is wishful thinking. Some of it is social conformity. Some of it is affordability, brand loyalty. There are all kinds of things that might affect the difference between what we say and what we do. So the other approach is going and looking at what do consumers actually buy, right? And that there is data that will help us to see this, so we can get our hands on scanner data from the supermarkets and stores, etc., and then see what kind of pet food products they buy and what kind of attributes are present in these pet food products. The problem with that, again, we can learn a lot from this, but the problem with that is that past product purchases might be a predictor of future product purchases, but they're not perfect predictors. To give you an example, is when the iPhone came out in 2007 or so, right, and during that period. So in 2005, we went and looked at what kind of cell phones people are buying. We would never be able to predict that in 2-3 years, the iPhone will be the most sold, most demanded product. So then if there is a pet food product that has a potential to become a bestseller or most demanded, or there's a specific attribute that consumers want, we might get an idea, general trends, by looking at past purchases, but it's not very accurate, usually. So what we really need is the combination of both. But then it's essentially kind of asking, what is it that you want? And then going and seeing what is it that you actually buy. We can design some experiments that will give us some ideas on that. We can give people money, ask them first what they want and like, and then see what they buy. But then that becomes expensive and very time consuming too. So lack of data is one of the reasons that it's hard to kind of get that insight. So that's essentially what motivated us to look at this issue, because if we can gain better insight on what is it that people want and what is it they actually buy, then we'll help pet food manufacturers to make better decisions on both the product design but also marketing.
Mm-hmm. Is there a way to kind of estimate this gap between what a consumer says they want and what they're actually buying?
So that's what we're trying to do with this project. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So let me tell you the approach that we took with that. Mm-hmm. So we went and interviewed, so we did a survey of US pet food buyers, specifically focusing on dog food buyers, because the dog owners is a significant majority of US households. And we designed a survey questionnaire with 50 questions, asking them everything about the income, education, and then the pet characteristics, the breed, the age, even the name, and then the buying habits. So when they go to buy pet food, what are the important factors they consider? Is it price, ingredients? Is it the claims? For each of these, for let's say ingredients, what are the specific attributes that they value most, etc.? What are their feeding habits? And then what they actually are feeding to their dogs, both in terms of pet food, but also in terms of pet treat. And then we had about observation on about 5,000 US pet food buyers, 18 years and older. And we knew all of that information plus what they actually feed. So then we went to Chewy.com and we gathered data on all of the products that these pet food buyers in our survey identified. So that's about 7,000 different products, both food and treat. And then we matched it with each respondent. So now we know essentially what they say they want, what they consider important in the pet food that they feed, but then we also see what they actually bought and what they're actually feeding. So what we call this is, we call the first one is the wish list, and the other one is shopping cart. So we can see what is in their wish list and we can see what is in their shopping cart. And so to go back to your question, what are the attributes that US pet food buyers, dog food buyers specifically, say they want most or consider most important when they buy pet food? And we divided this into categories. We have health attributes, we have ingredient attributes, we have processing attributes, and we have supply chain attributes. So when we look at health attributes, digestive tract health, joint health, and mobility were two top attributes selected by the highest percentage of respondents, so about 20 to 30%. And then weight control and brain aging were other two, which were in kind of 10 to 20% range of respondents selecting that. When we looked at ingredients, natural was one of the top selected by about 26% of respondents, grain-free by 18%, no byproducts 10%, organic another 10%, and then the rest of them were in single digits. When we looked at processing attributes, fresh was selected by 45% of respondents. Minimally processed was selected by 35% of respondents. And then when we looked at supply chain attributes, made in USA was by far the most selected. By 44% of respondents said when we're buying pet food and we're looking at attributes, made in USA is an important attribute that we consider. And then eco-friendly and sustainable were the other two, but they were in about 18 and 16%. And locally made was about 10%. So that gives us idea what at least the sample of 5,000 US pet food buyers said that they value, but our sample we designed it to be representative of US dog food buyers. So we can kind of gain an idea of what is it that consumers say they want. And then we say, okay, now let's go and look at what they actually feed, because we know the product that they buy and feed. And we say, let's see if the products that they actually buy and feed have these attributes that they say they want and value.
Now I'm curious.
Yes. So again, we divided into similar categories. So from the health perspective, and here we differentiate between food and treats. So joint health and mobility, one of the most appearing in the product that we saw in the shopping cart. Skin care and coat care, brain aging, and then digestive tract health.
Can I just maybe just to clarify? So when you talk about those categories now in the shopping carts, so joint and so on, is it on the food label or is it it's not a treat, right? So it's now just the food at the moment. Okay.
This is food. So this will be on food packaging. So these are kind of highlighted or promoted as attributes of this food. It might also be in a food description on a website, right? Not just the packaging, because if you're shopping online, then you might read the description, and if it's highlighting saying this is good for joint health, etc. So that's what's present. Because the data that we collected, we actually scraped it from the description also, and we had to sort for this product. Here are the attributes, list of attributes that are associated with it. And then for treats, And it's kind of similar, but then there we have calming support, dental care, skin and coat care. Those are also top attributes that appeared in the products that were bought by these 5,000 respondents that we had.
And for the treats themselves, are there preferences in which format those treats are? Or
let's see, because right now those were just the health attributes. I think in some of the processing attributes we might see some of that.
Okay.
So for the ingredients, for pet food, limited ingredients, human grade, non-GMO, grain-free, those were natural. Those were attributes that showed up in products in the shopping cart of from 40 to over 50% of respondents. And then no corn, no soy, no wheat was another attribute. There's around 30%.
And how is now the ratio of fresh to kibble or fresh to processed? Because you said that the wish list was 45% fresh, and in the shopping cart, ultimately.
So if we look at processing attribute, wet, canned were the ones that are appearing most. And then fresh was there, but about 5% of respondents had products that pet food products that had fresh on them. This was different for treats. For treats, there were about 30% that had treats that had fresh on them. And then when we looked at the supply chain, by far about 64% of the respondents of the products, pet food products in respondent shopping cart, or what they actually feed, had made in USA.
Okay.
And it was the same for treats as well. And then, so that kind of covers what we see in a shopping cart. Mm-hmm. Then we said, okay, what if we compare? We kind of say, because this is just what everybody says, right? So everybody says those are the most important things that we want. And then we go and look at everybody's shopping cart, and those are the things that show up most. And then we say, okay, now let's go and look at the shopping cart of a person who values made in USA, for example, and see whether the product they actually buy is made in USA. And there are some interesting things that show up. So from the most wanted one in a wish list, we had, from the health attribute perspective, digestive tract health was one of the most selected as most preferred or important attribute in their shopping purchasing decisions. And that also, for everybody who said digestive tract health is important, there were about 18 to 20% of buyers who actually had products with digestive and digestive tract health attributes in their cart. In contrast, so about 7% who said skincare is important. Out of those, close to 45% actually had products, pet food products, that had skincare on them. There are different explanations to this. I think one hypothesis is that just skincare attribute or claim is so ubiquitous in pet food products. And that might be one of the factors there. Looking at ingredient list, so natural and grain-free were some of the top wanted attributes. And when we look at the shopping cart of a person who says natural or grain-free is important for me, so close to 40% actually have natural and grain-free in their shopping cart. Looking at the limited ingredients, there were about 8% who said that's important, but over 50% had products in their shopping cart that said limited ingredient. And again, I think that also might be just part of the trend, or is just one of the claims that is broadly available on products. In contrast, So there were about 5% who said sustainability is one of the top important um, attributes. But out of those who said that, only 1% had products that had sustainability
Okay.
claim. As far as pet food, for treat, it's even lower. So, and I know, sustainability is a big issue. So it's those types of insights that we're trying to kind of distill and see, is it something that consumers want? Is it something they will actually buy? And then going to the next level is what's that? We have a project, a colleague of mine is working on research looking at the willingness to pay for sustainability.
Exactly. And so maybe we only have, unfortunately, a few minutes left. And so makes me maybe what are you think some of the major reasons there's this gap, right? I would assume cost is probably one, correct?
Yes. So I think probably two big ones are affordability and availability.
Okay.
So, of course, if somebody asks you, if I don't know what are your dietary preferences, but if somebody asks me, would I prefer steak or hamburger, I'm going to say steak. But when you go to a restaurant and see the prices, you might change your mind. So that's the price is one of them, and then availability is another one. So it might be that some of the folks who are looking for sustainability just don't have a lot of selection where they doing their shopping. So that's another one. And then there are others that kind of come to play, and that might include brand loyalty, for example. We might be loyal to a particular brand that just doesn't have some of the attributes that we're looking for. The other one might be social conformity. So, certain segments of population would like to think of themselves or would like to be thought of as, eco-friendly, caring about environment, etc., and sustainable, etc. But it might not necessarily be reflected in the actual shopping. So, so that might be another factor that explains it.
So what are the kind of the big takeaways and implications for manufacturers or pet food companies or treat companies?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing is not just trying to find out what people buy or what people want, but try to really understand why they want or buy what they say they want or buy. It's a tough thing to try to distill. It's much easier to just get a lot of data on what people are buying and just see what are the things that are being sold most. But, if we follow that route, there might be some trends and there might be some fads, right? But if we try to develop a product that we hope will get sold a lot, product development takes time, resources, and effort, and you want to put a product on the market that will succeed. And more aligned your product attributes with consumer preferences, the higher the likelihood they will succeed. On the flip side, what are the risks of putting a product that is not aligned? Obviously, the waste of resources, etc. But then, it can affect on a brand reputation side. It can affect on consumer trust side as well. Right? So, really, the whole point of this research that we're trying to do is how can we help pet food companies understand consumer preferences and consumer needs better and buying behavior better, so then they can compete more effectively in a market that is becoming increasingly competitive and where competing on attributes is becoming more and more important.
That's a very, very insightful, knowledge. Is those data published already, or?
Some of it has been published. Some of it is in the pipeline. So there will be some coming out. I usually post on my LinkedIn when papers come out. So anybody who follows.
Very much looking forward to that. So with this, we're at the end of our episode. Unfortunately, it was very, very insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented to you by Wisnetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback is very valuable to us. So until next time, this is Jan Sukodolski from the Pet Food Science Podcast signing off. Thank you so much. Bye.